Thank you. I'd like to call this meeting to order of the Joint Subcommittee on General Government. Committee Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Assemblywoman Gorlow.
Here.
Assemblyman Hafen.
Here.
Assemblywoman Howdigi. Assemblyman Levitt.
Here.
Assemblywoman Miller.
Here.
Assemblywoman Peters.
Here.
Senator Dennis.
Click here.
Senator Goycochea.
Here.
Chair Brooks.
Here. Thank you. Just some quick housekeeping. Please keep your cameras on and your microphones muted when you're talking, or unless you're talking. And also, if you need to get a hold of me, I got Teams up and working today, or you can just raise your hand. It's not a big committee. I'll see you. Or you can hit me up on the instant message or something. I'll get to you. And for the general public, at the end of the agenda today, we'll have public comment, and you can call in with the information that's on the agenda as it's been posted, or you can go to the legislative website, the Nellis section of the legislative website. There's a banner at the top that you can walk you through how to get on and make public comment. We have, now that we've taken roll call, the closing packets will be posted on Nellis, and you can go to the meeting page for today and get those closing documents. And if you wish to print them out, this would be the time to do that. So if you could turn your cameras off, you're getting the closing documents together, and then when you're ready, turn your camera back on, and then we'll jump right into it once I see everyone's cameras back on. And broadcast services, can we take a recess while our members are doing that?
Meeting to broadcast.
Thank you.
Chair Brooks and committee, you are live again to the broadcast and may reconvene whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Well, now that we all have our closing documents, we can get started. Today we have 13 tourism and cultural affairs budgets to close. 5 have been previously heard by this subcommittee and 8 are staff closings. Ms. Morris will be presenting the closings for us today. But if there are any questions, we also have Director Scolari and other members, other folks from the team at Tourism and Cultural Affairs that could answer questions if we need them to. So, Ms. Morris, will you please present the closing documents?
Thank you. Nancy Morris, Fiscal Analysis Division for the record. The first budget we will be considering today starts on page 3 of the closing packet. It is the Tourism Development Budget, budget account 1523. There is one major closing issue in this budget. The governor's recommended budget includes a reduction of $25,000. I'm sorry, a $50,000 reduction in room tax transfers, which would decrease the amount available for tourism development grant programs in fiscal year 2022 to $47,652, which is a reduction of 52.3%. These grants are utilized to fund tourism-related infrastructure projects targeted at improving the visitor experience. During the budget hearing on February 23rd, the agency communicated this grant program is secondary to the Rural Marketing Grant Program administered through the Tourism Development Fund budget. Also during the budget hearing, the subcommittee discussed whether it would be appropriate to utilize reserves to restore the recommended $50,000 reduction. Reserves in this budget are primarily comprised of room tax transfers from the Tourism Development Fund unspent in previous fiscal years and also include Nevada tourism license plate renewal fees and interest. It would be appropriate to utilize these funding sources to support the Tourism Development Grant Program. As this budget only supports grants, it is not necessary to maintain a reserve for operational cash flow purposes. Therefore, the subcommittee may wish to consider utilizing a portion of the reserves to restore the recommended $50,000 reduction in grants in fiscal year 2022. Considering the governor's recommended budget includes reserves of $135,000 in fiscal year 22 and approximately $142,000 in fiscal year 23, if the subcommittee wishes to approve this option, this budget would have reserves of $85,464 in fiscal year 22 and $92,105 in fiscal year 23. On page 5 of the closing packet are 2 options for the subcommittee to consider. Option A is to approve a reduction in room tax revenue transferred from the Tourism Development Fund of $50,000 and a corresponding reduction in tourism development grants in fiscal year 22 as recommended by the governor, resulting in authority of $47,652 for tourism development grants in fiscal year 2022. Option B, approve a reduction in room tax revenues transferred from the Tourism Development Fund of $50,000 and approve utilizing reserves of $50,000 in fiscal year 22, which would result in authority for tourism development grants of $97,652 in each year of the upcoming biennium.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Do any of the committee members have any questions on the this budget or the options that we're looking at today? Senator Gokachia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I didn't catch where you wanted me to message you out. I can try that rather than the hand wave. But I was just wondering, and I know we really don't have a way to track it, but a lot of these small agencies and NGOs, had the ability through the COVID relief packages in there to actually access dollars. Even the PETS grant made it available to them. So, we really don't have a fix for how big an impact given the relief funding that came out of the CARES Act, and so it's hard to measure how much of an impact this reduction of 50,000 will have.
Senator Gokachia, waving a hand works just fine for me. I saw you. Perfect. There is actually, we'll see later in the closing packet where we are seeing ARP grant money directly being referenced going into a different account. And so good point that you bring up.
Thank you, sir.
Senator Gokachia, did that you needed a staff to try to answer on that, or are we just trying to bring that?
No, I just want to establish for the committee before we start shifting money around, maybe we should look at the whole package. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, thank you. And Assemblyman Levitt.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair Brooks. I guess I'm just trying to understand this. So the reserves that would be used towards shoring up this $50,000, is that are those reserves currently in the Tourism Development Fund? Is that reserves that was already in the grant program?
Nancy Morris, Fiscal Analysis Division. The reserves are currently in this budget. They consist primarily of unspent room tax revenue transfers from prior years, and as well as license plate renewal fees and interest. So they are currently in this budget. It would just be utilizing the reserves as opposed to potentially rolling them forward to future fiscal years.
And so those reserves are not specifically dedicated towards the tourism development grants. The reserves could be used if we needed them in some other way, shape, or form.
The purpose of this budget is providing these grants. They do not have operational or other expenditures in this budget. So the money would either be used for reserves or balanced forward.
So I'm just out of my own understanding. Sorry, I'm not well versed on this. You'd stated that there's not really a purpose for reserves in the first place when it comes to this particular budget. Then why is there reserves at all?
To clarify, the reserves are not needed. There's no minimum reserve level required to support operational expenses as we see in many other budgets. The reserves in this case have just been accumulated for unused or unexpended funds for grant purposes.
Okay. So just to clarify, the reserves can only be used for the purpose of grants.
For the way this budget is currently structured, that is correct. If legislation were to be approved that would change that, then that would change the options.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair Brooks.
Thank you for the questions, Assemblyman Levitt. I had the exact same ones last night, so appreciate that. Any other questions on this budget or these options? Based upon what the information provided us and the options we have, I would look for a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I move to approve a reduction in room tax revenues transferred from the Tourism Development Fund of $50,000 and approve utilizing reserves of $50,000 in FY 2022, which would result in authority for tourism development grants of $97,652 in each year of the upcoming biennium.
Second.
I have a motion for option B and a second. Do we have any discussion on that motion from the members? Seeing none, could we please take a roll call vote?
Assemblywoman Gorlow,
Yes.
Assemblyman Hafen,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Howdegi,
Yes.
Assemblyman Levitt,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Miller,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Peters,
Yes.
Senator Dennis,
Yes.
Senator Goycochea,
Yes.
Chair Brooks.
Yes, and that motion passes. Thank you. Ms. Morris, can we go on to the next?
The next budget on page 7 of the closing packet is the Tourism Development Fund, budget account 1522. This budget, the primary mission is to generate revenue for the state of Nevada through activities that encourage tourist visitation. This budget is funded primarily with 3/8% of lodging taxes received in the state. There are 4 major closing issues in this budget. The discussion of the first one begins on page 8 of the closing packet. The governor's recommended revenue of $40.4 million for the biennium is approximately $12 million lower than the $52.3 million approved by the 2019 legislature for the 2019-21 biennium. In fiscal year 2020, the department received $19.1 million in room tax revenue, or $6.6 million less than the legislatively approved amount of $25.7 million.
Without, they're short on their.
The chart on the table in the middle of page 9 shows the room tax revenue transfers recommended in the governor's budget of $11.4 million over the 21-23 biennium, which is a $1.3 million reduction compared to the $12.7 million approved for the 2019 biennium. These monies are transferred to help support other budgets, both within the Department of Tourism, as well as the Film Office, Governor's Washington Office, and State Parks. Fiscal staff recommends technical adjustments to reconcile the transfers for some of these budgets, which are included in other closing item 5. During the February 23rd hearing, the agency communicated it anticipated Nevada tourism to gradually improve over the 21-23 biennium and to recover within 7% of FY 2019 levels by the end of fiscal year 23. The projections used for the room tax revenues in the executive budget were from December of 2020, and due to changes in the variables the agency utilizes in their projections, the agency provided updated revenues in March of 2021 for 3 scenarios: a best case, a mid-level, and a worst case scenario. The executive budget utilized the December mid-level scenario to build the governor's recommended budget. And with the updated projections for the best case scenario for the upcoming biennium would result in $12.1 million in revenue increase over the governor's recommended budget. The mid-level scenario would be $1.6 million lower than the governor's recommended budget, and the worst case scenario would be $18.5 million, as shown in the table on page 10. The different scenarios factor in different different interest and levels of returning tourism. In the best case scenario, vaccinations occur quickly and travel and room demand also recover quickly, which would lead to record high room levels, occupancy levels for rooms, and room tax revenues. In the mid-level scenario, vaccines become available, initial travel hesitation fades, conferences, conventions, and shows resume in fiscal year 2022, leading to the return to close to fiscal year 2019 levels by the end of the biennium. And in the worst case scenario, COVID-19 would continue to spread and there would be no significant recovery to travel in the 21-23 biennium. The agency also provided updated reserve projections for fiscal year 21. They project revenues of $9.9 million, which is $16.7 million less than the legislatively approved $26.6 million. for revenue in fiscal year 21, and they are projecting a reserve level of 3.6 million in fiscal 21, which is 7.8 million less than the 11.3 million included in the governor's recommended budget. The chart on the top of page 11 shows the comparison of reserve levels given the governor's recommended budgets versus the 3 different revenue scenarios provided by the agency. As you can see, with the worst case scenario, the budget would be insolvent in both fiscal year 2022 and 2023. And if that were to materialize, then the agency would need to submit work program revision requests to implement additional cost-saving measures. As previously noted, the executive budget utilized the mid-level scenario from the agency's December 2020 projections. The subcommittee may wish to approve the agency's updated mid-level room tax revenue projections of 38.8 million over the 21-23 biennium, or decreases from the legislatively approved amount. The agency could request work programs to effectuate changes to approve revenue and expenditure levels. And using the March 2021 room tax revenue projections, as well as the projected reserve level for fiscal year 21 of 3.6 million with the governor's recommended level of expenditures, inclusive of the mentioned technical adjustments, fiscal staff projects fiscal year 2022 reserves of 3.1 million and fiscal year 23 reserves of 3.6 million, as shown in the table in the middle of page 11, which results in reserve days in fiscal year 2022 of approximately 68 days and in fiscal year 23 of approximately 60 days. And the reserve target level in this budget is 60 days. The decision for the subcommittee at the bottom of page 11, does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of the agency's updated room tax revenues of 38.8 million over the 21-23 biennium?
Thank you, Ms. Morris. And this was kind of a complicated one for me to wrap my head around. And I think the notes that you provided and the explanation you gave are great and very clear. It's still a very complicated budget. And so I'm sure we might have some questions. Any questions from the committee? Mr. Levitt.
Sorry, it is really complicated for me as well. So the 38.8 million over the 21-23 biennium, is that the mid? So that's the mid-level scenario as far as reserves go?
That is the 38.8 million is the mid-level revenue projection provided by the agency for the upcoming biennium.
Okay, thank you.
And I think, when we look at I'm optimistic and the evidence that I see, I haven't been home and I've been home once in the last 3 months, but the evidence that I see from what's happening in Las Vegas, which is what drives this revenue, is that a recovery is happening. And I'm super optimistic that we'll reach and exceed our best case scenarios in here. But noticing what Senator Gokachia said earlier, there's very little guidance from the federal government on what ARP could be used for. But one of the things that are funded by this revenue are definitely in that guidance. So I think that, I'm supportive of taking a mid-level approach with the understanding if room revenues go up, more money goes in there, and they can always come back to IFC and seek approval to spend additional monies on additional activities if that money's in there. And so I'm supportive of the more conservative mid-level approach with an understanding that we're all betting that it's going to be better than that, but that there also are probably future decisions that this body can make based on federal funding to maybe do things in this budget. So I'm supportive of that mid-level approach based on the recommendations of fiscal staff. Question?
I appreciate that, Chair Brooks.
Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, I'd take a motion.
I would move that the subcommittee approve recommendations that we use the agency's updated room tax revenues of $38.8 million over the 2021 to 23 biennium.
Second.
I have a motion from Assemblywoman Peters and a second from Senator Dennis. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I would take a roll call vote please take a roll call vote.
Assemblywoman Gorlow,
Yes.
Assemblyman Hafen,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Howdigi,
Yes.
Assemblyman Levitt,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Miller,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Peters,
Yes.
Senator Dennis,
Yes.
Senator Goy-Kachia,
Yes.
Chair Brooks.
Yes, and passes. Before I go on to the next budget, I did see, I just was informed, and I'm sorry I missed it, that Ms. Scolari might have, Director Scolari might have a comment on that.
Chair Brooks, thank you. For the record, Brenda Scolari, Director of Tourism and Cultural Affairs. I just wanted to confirm what you stated earlier about the complexity of this issue has to do with the fact that budget building began in August. And at that time, we were, just trying to provide the most accurate information we could, and it's, as you know, been a very fluid situation. In August, we were very positive about a recovery beginning in the fall. With the third wave of the pandemic, that did not happen. And so we provided another set in December. And now in March, yes, we're very positive that the pent-up demand for travel is going to get us to a possibly even a greater revenue outcome more quickly. But we do have the option of coming to IFC and getting our authority elevated at that time. But I just wanted to further explain why it seems very complicated, but really when you look at it through the lens of what we've been through over the last 6 months, it clarifies much of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director Scolari. It has been a wild ride, and especially if your budget is tied directly to room tax. That's a difficult place to find yourself in. So
that's correct.
I appreciate the important work that you're doing, and also the challenges you've faced over a year now. And it looks like there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and we'll be working together over the next, I'm sure, interim to try to figure it all out.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Director.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate that explanation and clarification. And with that, we can move to the next budget.
The next major issue in this budget is on page 12 of the closing packet. It is room tax transfers reductions, decision unit E500. The governor recommends reducing room tax transfers to budgets within the Department of Tourism and Cultural Affairs, as well as the state parks budget within the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources by $696,122 in fiscal year 2022, and replacing the transfer reductions with corresponding amounts of general fund appropriations in budgets receiving the transfers. The chart in the middle of page 12 shows the recommended room tax transfer reductions in fiscal year 2022 in this decision unit, along with the corresponding amount of general fund replacements recommended in the receiving budget decision units. In this budget, in this decision unit, the decision is just about reducing the transfers to the other budgets. The chart on the table, the chart on the top of page 13 Staff has provided to show the breakdown of general fund and room tax transfers for some of the divisions within the Department of Tourism and Cultural Affairs. During the February 23rd budget hearing, the agency communicated that due to the reduced room tax revenues in the Division of Tourism, the Division of Tourism had executed only essential programs, and with reduced transfers to other budgets, it anticipated the receiving budgets would also have to make similar reductions to programs. And due to the anticipated rebound in room tax revenues in fiscal year 23, the recommended reduction is only for fiscal year 22. The decision for the subcommittee is, does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of reduced room tax transfers totaling $696,122 in fiscal year 2022 to other budgets within the Department of Tourism and Cultural Affairs, as well as the state parks budget as recommended by the governor?
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Any questions from the committee on this? Senator Gocochea.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm kind of concerned because the bulk of this reduction is going to be borne by state parks. How does that, do we have a percentage comparison of what that $500,000 does to, or 400 some change does to state parks total budget? Is that a 2 or 3% reduction, or is it bigger? We understand they've had the impact during this time frame because people did leave town and go to the rural areas, and especially those state parks. I just want to make sure that we keep that, the committee keeps that in their mind as we move forward and more funding is available, that the 2/3 of this hit is borne by state parks.
No, that's an important point, and I'm glad you brought that up. And I think that's why it's so important to try to keep them functioning even at whatever level they're at right now. And they have stepped up and provided quite a bit of an outlet for Nevadans and people traveling to our state during this pandemic. Senator Dennis?
Just a comment, as every time we always do these budgets, and every time I look at, the budgets for the museums and for the park for that matter, just wanted to make a comment that these are critical things that occur in our state museums, and yet when we every time we have a crisis in our budget, we always cut museums and parks, things that people use, and I just hope that someday we can get to the point where we can figure out a way that every time we have a downturn, we don't have to reduce our, I remember one of the things that we did during the last one was that we reduced the number of days that they were open and those kind of things. So hopefully, because these are critical things that sometimes we don't always think about. And when we make these cuts, sometimes they're huge because their budgets aren't that huge. But so just wanted, I guess it's just something I've been thinking about that, I guess we don't always appreciate the arts and museums that we have as much as we probably should. But this is just indicative of the fact that, our budgets are already pretty slim regardless. And then when we have to make these cuts, it really makes a huge impact on the arts and the museums and our parks. So just a comment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Dennis. Any other comments or discussion from the committee on this decision? Seeing none, I'd take a motion.
I would move to approve the recommendation as stated by fiscal staff on this.
Second, Senator Dennis, second.
I have a motion from Assemblywoman Peters to approve the recommended reduction in transfers, and then I have a second from Senator Dennis. Any discussion on the motion? And is that motion and the description by Ms. Morris sufficient enough for the record?
I'd be happy to repeat the recommendation if you'd like, Chair.
Could you please?
Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of reduced room tax transfers totaling $696,122 in fiscal year 2022 to other budgets within the Department of Tourism and Cultural Affairs, as well as the state parks budget as recommended by the governor?
Thank you for repeating that motion, and we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on that motion? Seeing none, let's have a roll call vote.
Assemblywoman Gorlow,
Yes.
Assemblyman Hafen, Assemblywoman Howdigy,
Yes.
Assemblyman Levitt, excuse me,
Yes.
sorry. Assemblywoman Miller,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Peters,
Yes.
Senator Dennis,
Yes.
Senator Goycochea,
Yes.
Chair Brooks.
Yes, and the motion carries. Thank you. Can we move on to the next one?
Major closing issue 3 begins on page 13 of the closing packet. It is a budget reduction decision unit E600. The governor recommends expenditure reductions totaling $2.8 million over the biennium, comprised of fiscal year 2022 reductions in marketing contracts of $1.8 million, dues and registrations of $77,536, rural grants of $730,549, and transfers to tourism of $50,000, as well as travel reductions of $99,117 in each year of the 21-23 biennium. If the recommended reductions are approved, authority in the marketing and advertising category would total $7.6 million in fiscal year 22 and $10.9 million in fiscal year 23. In the rural marketing grants, the governor recommends reducing the grants by $730,549 in fiscal year 22, bringing total category authority to $730,547, compared to the $1.6 million approved for each year in the 2019-21 biennium. In fiscal year 23, the recommended authority for the category totals $1.5 million. These grants are awarded to nonprofits and local tourism entities for a variety of marketing projects, including video production, advertising, and attending travel and trade shows. The transfers to tourism development were previously discussed in the other budget, which was the $50,000 reduction in fiscal year 22. During the February 23rd budget hearing, the agency indicated it had focused its marketing efforts on in-state visitors due to the travel restrictions imposed. And the agency indicated the recommended $2.7 million reduction in fiscal 22 would impact its engagement with international markets as well as domestic marketing and advertising. And some of the marketing development would be completed by in-house staff as opposed to external sources. Regarding international marketing, the agency stated it would continue to monitor international travel sentiment and anticipated resuming marketing efforts in Canada and Mexico in fiscal 22, with potentially restarting efforts in other top international markets during the biennium. However, long-haul visits were not anticipated to fully recover to pre-pandemic levels until fiscal 2023. During the hearing, the agency also indicated the rural marketing grants were intended to strengthen the marketing ability of the division's partners, and reducing the grants would mean that the partners would have less funding available for their marketing efforts. The decision for the subcommittee on the top of page 15 Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of budget reductions of $2.7 million in fiscal 22 and $99,117 in fiscal year 23 as recommended by the governor?
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Any questions from the committee on this decision? Senator Gokachia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, more of a comment than a question. I really appreciate it. Unfortunately, the biggest hit in this particular budget is the rural grants. You know, they did enjoy, because we were traveling in state, the rurals didn't suffer during the pandemic as bad as, say, the true urban areas. But I am concerned as we move forward and come out of the pandemic, we won't have the ability to really advertise rural Nevada. And so realizing there isn't a lot of money available, but if more money does become available, I hope the committee would focus on the fact of restating those numbers. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Gokachia. I share your concern. And again, this is one where we've seen the opportunity for direct grants coming from ARP. And we've also seen that this is the type of activities in the state and revenues that seem to be, based on the guidance we've received from the federal government, applicable to future monies from the feds. So I appreciate that. I'm with you. I share your concerns, and we got to keep this on our radar moving forward. It's all timing at this point, right? And so any other questions from the committee? And I do think Director Scolari might have some comments that might help clarify this. Director, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Brooks. I just wanted to say I do agree with Senator Goycochea. I'd prefer to scale other marketing spending. Our marketing grant program really is at the heart of our support of rural tourism partners, and I would love to see that restored to the extent possible. And we'll, make cuts in other areas that are more easily scaled. And I just really, we exist to support our rural tourism partners statewide, and that is our only major pass through to those partners in terms of funding. Otherwise, they're looking to us for help in domestic spending, and of course, we can align and collaborate on the marketing and campaigns that Travel Nevada is doing. But for them to be able to support their own marketing efforts locally and regionally, this is the only way it happens through the state and through Travel Nevada. So I just wanted to agree with that sentiment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director. Appreciate that. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, I take a motion on this decision.
Thank you, Chair. I move to approve the governor's recommended budget reduction of $2.7 million in fiscal year 2022 and $99,117 in fiscal year 2023.
Second.
I have a motion from Assemblywoman Peters, a second from Senator Dennis. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, we take a roll call vote, please.
Assemblywoman Gorlow,
Yes.
Assemblyman Hafen,
No.
Assemblywoman Howdigy,
Yes.
Assemblyman Levitt,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Miller,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Peters,
Yes.
Senator Dennis,
Yes.
Senator Goycochea,
Yes.
Chair Brooks.
Yes. And for my records, can I please see who was the no vote on that?
Assemblyman Hafen.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. So motion carries, and we can move on to the next item.
Major closing issue number 4 on page 15 of the closing packet is a transfer of the Las Vegas office lease, Decision Unit E225. The Division of Tourism indicates it had 2 positions in its Las Vegas office as of March of 2020 and shared space with the Nevada Arts Council, which was funded by the Division of Tourism budget. This division now has 1 position in Las Vegas, and the governor recommends the Nevada Arts Council budget assume the lease and operating costs for a smaller space in Las Vegas. The agency indicated the remaining position in Las Vegas is an information technology technician who is housed at the Nevada State Museum in Las Vegas. And the governor recommends the Nevada Arts Council budget fund the costs of a smaller space at the same location, which is a decision unit in the Nevada Arts Council budget recommended to be funded by general fund appropriations. During the February 23rd budget hearing, subcommittee members expressed concern over the lack of tourism staff in Las Vegas, and the agency indicated that it did maintain strong partnerships with the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority, as well as the Las Vegas Territory Tourism Committee. The agency stated that as revenue improved and positions were filled in the future, it would consider staff based in Clark County or reopening an office in Las Vegas. As previously noted, the corresponding decision unit in the Arts Council budget recommends funding the lease costs with general funds, and fiscal staff would recommend closing the Nevada Arts Council budget consistent with the subcommittee's decision for this decision unit. The decision for the subcommittee on page 15 is, does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of reducing the space currently occupied at the Division of Tourism's Las Vegas office and transferring the existing lease to the Nevada Arts Council for an expenditure reduction of $169,854 over the biennium as recommended by the governor.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Any questions on this decision? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion on this decision.
Thank you, Chair. I would move that we recommend approval of reducing the space currently occupied at the Division of Tourism's Las Vegas office and transferring the existing lease to the Nevada Arts Council for an expenditure reduction of $169,854 over the biennium as recommended by the governor.
Second.
Any discussions on the motion? I would just like to note that, this is my backyard, literally my backyard, and where these reductions are taking place, and already a minimal representation in Southern Nevada, and it's just getting worse. And so these are difficult decisions we're making and that affect us all. And so I appreciate the position they find themselves in, and look forward to a day when we can help restore some of these. So any other discussion on the motion? Seeing none, can we take a roll call vote?
Assemblywoman Gorlow,
Yes.
Assemblyman Hafen,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Howdigy,
Yes.
Assemblyman Levitt,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Miller,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Peters,
Yes.
Senator Dennis,
Yes.
Senator Goycochea,
Yes.
Chair Brooks.
Yes, and carries. And that motion was made by Assemblywoman Peters and the second by Senator Dennis. Thank you. So let's move on to our next item, please.
On page 16 of the closing packet, there are 3 other closing items included in the table. Fiscal staff would note other closing item 4, a budget amendment was received related to the cost allocation adjustments, which is related to the major issue in the museum and history budget, with the authority to make adjustments for the budget amendment A214781522 based on the subcommittee's closing action in the museums and history budget. This recommendation appears reasonable. And other closing item 5 is the reference transfer adjustments, and with noted technical adjustments, this recommendation appears reasonable. Fiscal staff recommends other closing items 1 through 3 be closed as recommended by the governor, and other closing item 4 be closed as recommended by the governor, with authority to make adjustments for budget amendment A214781522 based on the subcommittee's closing action in the museums and history budget, and other closing item 5 be closed with the noted technical adjustments. Fiscal staff requests authority to make other technical adjustments as necessary.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Any questions on that decision from the committee? Seeing none, can I get a motion?
Thank you, Chair. I would move that all closing items 1 through 3 be closed as recommended by the governor, and other closing item 4 be closed as recommended by the governor, with authority to make adjustments for budget amendment A214781522 based on the subcommittee's closing action in the museums and history budget. Another closing item 5 be closed with the noted technical adjustments. I also would like to add that fiscal staff retain the authority to make other technical adjustments as necessary.
Second.
I have a motion from Assemblywoman Peters, a second from Senator Dennis. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, could we have a roll call vote?
Assemblywoman Gorlow,
Yes.
Assemblyman Hafen,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Howdigy,
Yes.
Assemblyman Levitt,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Miller, Assemblywoman Peters,
Yes.
Senator Dennis,
Yes.
Senator Goy-Kachia,
Yes.
Chair Brooks.
Yes. And the motion carries with the majority of the members present. And with that, we can move on to the next items.
On page 17 of the closing packet begins the museums and history budget account 2941. This is the Office of the Administrator, which is responsible for the oversight and administration of the statewide museum system. There is one major closing issue in this budget, which is a funding source change, decision unit E501. As a budget reduction measure, the governor recommends replacing $182,031 in revenues, comprised of $81,914 general fund savings and $100,117 room tax transfer reductions that support position costs, with a corresponding amount of license plate renewal fees over the 21-23 biennium. To provide the license plate renewal fees, a corresponding $182,301 reduction in the commemorative license plate category was recommended. Pursuant to NRS 482-37901, the license plate renewal fees are to be used for educational projects and initiatives pertaining to the history of the state and other projects pertaining to preserving, promoting, and protecting the heritage of the state. Fiscal staff confirmed with the LCB Legal Division that it would not be appropriate to support personnel costs related to the general administration of the division with license plate renewal fee revenue as included in the governor's recommended budget. In the executive budget, this decision unit would recommend utilizing the license plate renewal fees to support personnel costs And to ensure the license plate renewal fees are only utilized for purposes authorized by statute, Budget Amendment A 214-762-941 would restore the $81,914 in general fund appropriations, $100,117 in room tax transfers, and the $182,031 reduction in the commemorative license plate category over the 21-23 biennium, thereby eliminating Decision Unit E501. With the budget amendment, license plate renewal fee revenue would not be used to support personnel costs, but would rather provide funding for programmatic activities as allowed by statute. Personnel costs would continue to be supported by general fund appropriations and room tax transfers. As mentioned, the corresponding budget amendment was submitted to reinstate the room tax transfers from the Tourism Development Fund budget to this budget. The decision for the subcommittee on page 19, does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of budget amendment A214-762-941 to eliminate Decision Unit E501, restoring general fund appropriations of $81,914, room tax transfers of $100,117, and $182,031 in the commemorative license plate expenditure category over the 2021-23 biennium.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Are there any questions from the committee on this decision? Seeing none, could I get a motion?
Thank you, Chair. I move that the subcommittee recommend approval of budget amendment A214-762-941 to eliminate decision unit E501, restoring general fund appropriations of $81,914, room tax transfers of $100,117, and $182,031 in the commemorative license plate expenditure category over the 2021-23 biennium.
Second.
I have a motion for approval from Assemblywoman Peters, a second from Senator Dennis. Any discussion on that motion? No discussion on the motion, so please take a roll call vote.
Assemblywoman Gorlow,
Yes.
Assemblyman Hafen, Assemblywoman Howdigy,
Yes.
Assemblyman Levitt,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Miller,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Peters,
Yes.
Senator Dennis,
Yes.
Senator Goycochea,
Yes.
Chair Brooks.
Yes, and the motion carries. Thank you. Can we move on to the next item?
On page 19, there is one other closing item in this budget. Fiscal staff recommends other closing item 1 be closed as recommended by the governor and requests authority for staff to make technical adjustments as necessary.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Any discussion on that decision? Seeing none, could I get a motion?
I would move to approve the recommendation as stated by staff.
Second.
I have a motion from Assemblywoman Peters, a second from Senator Dennis. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing no discussion on the motion, could I get a roll call vote?
Assemblywoman Gorlow,
Yes.
Assemblyman Hafen, Assemblywoman Howdigy,
Yes.
Assemblyman Levitt,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Miller,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Peters,
Yes.
Senator Dennis,
Yes.
Senator Goycochea,
Yes.
Chair Brooks.
Yes, thank you. Motion carries. And can we move on to the next budget?
On page 21 of the closing packet starts the Nevada Magazine budget account 1530. This is the publications section of the Division of Tourism within the Department of Tourism and Cultural Affairs. There's one major closing issue in this budget, which is the long-term financial stability of this budget. Although the 2019 Money Committees issued a letter of intent directing the agency to develop a plan for long-term financial stability, recommended expenditures exceed revenues, excluding the balance forward in the governor's recommended budget for the 21-23 biennium. The Nevada Magazine budget is an enterprise fund, which is intended to be self-supporting entity with all financial activities related to the publication or other operations of the magazine accounted for in the fund. During the 2019 session, the budget did not have sufficient funding for all costs related to magazine, and reserves in this budget had been decreasing since 2016. So to provide sufficient funding for costs and reserves to provide cash flow, the Money Committees approved adding room tax revenue transfers in the 2019-21 biennium. As a result of discussions about the declining reserve levels in this budget, the Money Committees issued a letter of intent directing the agency to develop a long-term plan for financial stability and report to the Interim Finance Committee. The agency's letter of intent response from October 22nd, 2020 Interim Finance Committee indicated the agency had identified measures that would improve its financial stability, including reducing the publications from 6 issues to 4 issues per year, broadening legacy magazine topics, enhancing digital capabilities, attracting larger advertisers and broader audiences, and increasing publications in its product portfolio. As noted, the governor's recommended budget includes continuing room tax revenue transfers of $265,562 over the 21-23 biennium to fund operating costs and maintain reserves. The governor's recommendation for this budget do not appear to reflect the improved long-term financial stability. The agency indicated it had shifted its production of the Nevada Magazine to 4 issues per year from the previous 6. However, progress towards other identified actions were impeded due to the COVID-19 pandemic and its effect on advertisers. The reserves for this budget in the governor's recommended budget are approximately 46 days in fiscal year 22 and 23 days in fiscal year 23. And reserves for enterprise accounts typically should equate to approximately 60 days of operating expenditures to maintain adequate cash flow. However, the agency indicated the recommended reserve levels are adequate for its operations. During the February 23rd hearing, the agency indicated it was considering publications focused on other specialty areas. However, the executive budget does not include decision units to affect such changes, and if operational changes are implemented during the 21-23 biennium, the agency may need to request work program revisions to reflect changes in revenue and/or expenditure levels. As far as expenditures, the agency had indicated that it had maintained reduced levels of travel and magazine printing costs consistent with its actual fiscal year 2020 base expenditure levels, and indicated all reasonable reductions had been identified and implemented. The agency also stated that as the publications section for the Division of Tourism, it did anticipate continuing transfers from the Tourism Development Fund to support Travel Nevada related publishing costs. Considering the governor's recommended budget includes room tax transfers of $265,562 over the 21-23 biennium and utilizing reserves to continue operations, resulting in declining reserve levels from approximately 46 days in fiscal year 22 to 23 days in fiscal year 23, the subcommittee may wish to recommend issuing a letter of intent to the agency to continue to report on its progress in completing identified steps towards financial stability. The decision for the subcommittee on the top of page 24. The subcommittee may wish to recommend issuing a letter of intent indicating that the agency should report its efforts and progress towards financial stability to the interim finance committee on a semi-annual basis through the 2021-23 biennium.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Any questions on that decision? I see none, so could I get a motion?
Thank you, Chair. I would move to approve the recommendation as stated by fiscal staff.
Second.
I have a motion from Assemblywoman Peters, a second from Senator Dennis. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, can we get a roll call vote?
Assemblywoman Gorlow,
Yes.
Assemblyman Hafen, Assemblywoman Howdigy,
Yes.
Assemblyman Levitt,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Miller,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Peters,
Yes.
Senator Dennis,
Yes.
Senator Goycochea,
Yes.
Chair Brooks.
Yes, the motion passes. And with that, we can move to the next budget.
On page 24 of the closing packet, there are two other closing items for this budget. Fiscal staff recommends other closing items 1 and 2 be closed as recommended by the governor and requests authority for staff to make technical adjustments as necessary.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Any questions about that decision? Seeing none, could we have a motion on that?
Thank you, Chair. I should have added this to my last motion, but I make a motion to approve the recommendation as stated by fiscal staff on closing items 1 and 2.
Second.
I have a motion from Assemblywoman Peters and a second from Senator Dennis. Any discussion on that motion? I see no discussion on that motion. Can we take another vote?
Assemblywoman Gorlow,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Howdigy,
Yes.
Assemblyman Hafen, Assemblyman Levitt,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Miller,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Peters,
Yes.
Senator Dennis,
Yes.
Senator Goycochea,
Yes.
Chair Brooks.
Yes, and the motion passes. Thank you. So now we can move on to the next budget. Sorry, that was jumping ahead.
On page 25 of the closing packet is the Nevada Humanities budget. Nevada Humanities works in partnership with local communities to develop and fund humanities activities and educational programs. There is one major closing issue in this budget. Decision Unit E600. The governor recommends reducing payments in support of Nevada Humanities by $25,000 per year for general fund savings of $50,000 over the 21-23 biennium. As shown in the chart on the middle of page 26, the funding levels of transfers to the Nevada Humanities have decreased from $200,000 during the 2007 to 2009 biennium to a low of $80,000 in the 2011 to 2013 biennium, but have been increasing up to last session's the $250,000 approved over the 2019-2021 biennium. And with the governor's recommendation, the funding level for the 21-23 biennium would be $200,000, or the same as approved for the 2017 to 2019 biennium. The agency indicates that it utilizes the general funds provided by the state to provide grants to other organizations, as well as to provide matching funds for the National Endowment for the Humanities grant. The agency indicated that a reduction in this transfer could impact its ability to provide sufficient match for future federal grant awards, which have been met previously with a combination of cash and in-kind support, as well as sub-grant matches, with the state's funding providing approximately 40 to 50% of the agency's cash match. The amount of the grant varies, so it is unknown whether the agency would have sufficient funds available to provide a match required to receive the full federal grant award that may otherwise be available in the 21-23 biennium. The agency did note that it distributed CARES Act funds to cultural nonprofits and could not retain those funds to support routine operating and program costs, and it anticipates receiving American Rescue Plan Act funds and similarly not being allowed to utilize those funds for operational costs. The decision for the subcommittee on page 27. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of reducing payments in support of the Nevada Humanities by $25,000 per year for a general fund savings of $50,000 over the 21-23 biennium as recommended by the governor?
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Any questions on this decision? Senator Gocochea?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And as we look at this, I guess we're assuming that the American Rescue Plan, those dollars would be available only to do part of the match. Is that correct?
Fiscal staff does not have details about the American Rescue Plan Act funds. The agency is, I believe Nevada Humanities is part of this call if the chair wishes to ask them for further information.
Well, and I apologize, Mr. Chair. I know we're all speculating because we don't have the guidelines, but I just wanted to. It isn't that big of a reduction if, in fact, you've got $1 million in between CARES Act and the American Rescue Plan. If those dollars are available for the match, it's the only point I was trying to bring forward.
Thank you, Senator Gocochea. This is actually one of unique scenarios that is starting to present itself to us, where there actually is some guidance, as it's outside of the piece that we would be discussing in the general fund piece. And so we do have Barr here to answer that question, and I had the same question as well.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. This is Christina Barr for the record. Senator Gocochea, would you mind just repeating your question so that I can answer it accurately?
Thank you, ma'am. And yeah, if I'd have stated it a little better, it probably would have helped. Again, we're looking at the fact that as we make this reduction, it could take away your ability to match federal grants. But we're assuming that the $360 in CARES Act money that has already was received and anticipated $700,000 in the American Rescue Plan Act funds, those could be used again, probably pretty much for match costs because they aren't allowed for operational costs, or it looks like that.
It depends. So, it's a cocktail of us matching our routine operating grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. The CARES Act funds did not require a match. We're investigating right now to see if those can be used to match our general operating support. And the American Rescue Funds, we have not received guidance yet for that. We have not received those funds. They're anticipated, but we also don't have an actual amount level yet from the National Endowment for the Humanities. So that's an estimated amount. So regardless, those funds that we receive, we are not allowed to use those for routine operating costs and programmatic costs. So that's been made very clear to us. So just, to clarify. Did that answer your question? I hope it did.
Yes, Yes, thank you, Ms. Barr. But, we're looking at a 25% reduction in general funding here, but we're also including almost $1 million in additional funds that we hope will at least get some of the pocket change off that. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And also, Ms. Barr, I have a question. And so you haven't received any concrete guidance from ARP through that national endowment sub-state allocation that exactly what it can or can't be used for, right? I mean, you're making some assumptions based upon past practices, but you don't actually know exactly what the guidance is yet, do you?
No, that's correct. I do not know what the guidance is yet for the American Rescue Funds.
We are all in the same boat. So I appreciate that. And so, and I agree with Senator Goicoechea's statement. And it's why I'm supportive of this decision, because I think we're all going to be looking at how all these streams of revenue interact with each other and trying to make sure that we equitably kind of distribute it to keep agencies and programs functioning the best. So thank you for that question, Senator Goicoechea, and thank you for that response, Ms. Barr. With that, any other questions on this decision? Seeing none, I would take a motion.
Assemblywoman Peters. Sorry, thank you. I lost track of my pages. I would move that the subcommittee recommend approval of reducing payment in support of the Nevada Humanities by $25,000 per year for general fund savings of $50,000 over the 2021-23 biennium as recommended by the governor.
Second.
I have a motion from Assemblywoman Peters, a second from Senator Dennis. Any discussion on that motion? No discussion on the motion. Could I take a roll call vote?
Assemblywoman Gorlow,
Yes.
Assemblyman Hafen,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Howdigy,
Yes.
Assemblyman Levitt,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Miller,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Peters,
Yes.
Senator Dennis,
Yes.
Senator Goicoechea,
Yes.
Chair Brooks.
Yes. And that motion passes. And so we can move on to our next budget.
I will now begin presenting the budgets which the subcommittee has not previously reviewed for the Department of Tourism and Cultural Affairs and for which fiscal staff is responsible for developing closing recommendations. I will pause following my presentation of each budget to allow for questions. When I have presented the last budget in this group and questions have been addressed, the chair may wish to ask for a single motion for closing consideration on all of the budgets for which fiscal staff is responsible for developing recommendations. On page 29 of the closing packet is the Stewart Indian School Living Legacy, which aims to educate the community about the American Indian people, provide information about the Stewart Indian School, and memorialize the American Indian children who attended the school. On page 30, there are 3 other closing items for this budget. Closing recommendations for this budget are included on the summary page in the closing packet.
Are there any questions on this budget? See none, so we can go to the next budget.
On page 31, the Indian Commission budget account 2600. The Nevada Indian Commission develops and improves cooperation and communication between Indian tribes and the state and local governments to enhance the lives of Nevada's Native American citizens. On page 32, there are 3 other closing items for this budget. Closing recommendations for this budget are included on the summary page in the closing packet.
Any questions on this budget? Seeing none, we can move to the next one.
Page 33, budget account 1350, the Lost City Museum, which is the Overton Lost City Museum, which was built to preserve prehistoric sites and artifacts that were being destroyed from the Lake Mead overflow during construction of the Hoover Dam. Page 34, there are 3 other closing items for this budget, and closing recommendations for this budget are included on the summary page in the closing packet.
Any questions on this budget? See none, so please move to the next budget, Ms. Morris.
Page 35, budget account 2870, the Nevada Historical Society, which collects, preserves, and interprets materials that represent Nevada's history for educational and aesthetic purposes. There are no major closing issues in this budget, and there are 2 other closing items as shown in the chart on page 36. Closing recommendations for this budget are included on the summary page in the closing packet.
Any questions on this budget? Seeing none, please move to the next budget.
Page 37, the Nevada State Museum, Carson City, budget account 2940. This museum is located in the 1869 U.S. Mint building in Carson City, and it's the official repository for much of Nevada's collections. There are no major closing issues in this budget. There are 2 other closing items as shown in the chart on page 38, and closing recommendations for this budget are included on the summary page in the closing packet.
Any questions? None, so let's go to the next one.
Page 39 is the Nevada State Museum, Las Vegas. Budget account 2943. This facility serves the public through collecting, preserving, and interpreting artifacts, specimens, and historical documents representing Southern Nevada, with emphasis on its relationship to the Mojave Desert. There are no major closing issues in this budget, and there are 2 other closing items as shown on page 40, and closing recommendations for this budget are included on the summary page in the closing packet.
Any questions? I don't see any, so let's move to the next one.
On page 41 of the closing packet is the Nevada State Railroad Museum's budget account 4216, which supports the operation of 3 railroad museums located in Carson City, Ely, and Boulder City. There are no major closing issues, and there is 1 other closing item in this budget as shown on page 42, and closing recommendations for this budget are included on the summary page in the closing packet.
Any questions on this budget? I see none, so let's go to our last budget.
Page 43, the Nevada Arts Council, which works with schools, art institutions, artists, municipalities, and tribal organizations to support diverse cultural activities, provides grants, and offers professional assistance to artists, cultural organizations, and schools, and coordinates statewide art programming and activities. There are no major closing issues in this budget, and there are 3 other closing items as shown on page 44. Closing recommendations for this budget are included on the summary page in the closing packet.
Any questions on this budget? I do not see any, so I think we can move on to the summary of the staff closed budgets.
As previously noted, fiscal staff is responsible for developing recommendations for the following budgets, which are recommended to be closed as recommended by the governor. Fiscal staff recommends that the following budgets be closed as recommended by the governor and requests authority for staff to make technical adjustments as necessary. Budget account 2601, Stewart Indian School Living Legacy, 2600, Indian Commission, 1350, Museums and History, Lost City Museum, 2870, Museums and History, Nevada Historical Society. 2940, Museums and History, Nevada State Museum, Carson City. 2943, Museums and History, Nevada State Museum, Las Vegas. 4216, Museums and History, Nevada State Railroad Museums. And 2979, Nevada Arts Council.
Do we have any questions on the summary, suggestions, recommendations for the staff close? Senator Gokachia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's more of a comment, but as we look through these budgets and the amount of general fund that is required to backfill the room tax shortfall, and then the fact that that is absent in 2023, it's just how critical it's going to be that we don't hit a second spike and see a flattening of room tax again, or again, we will have some problems and we'll be back here again trying to fix it. Thank you.
I appreciate and agree with those comments, Senator Gokachia, and I think it's also going to be why it's going to be so important that we are very judicious and thoughtful on how we move forward with any federal funding as well. So I appreciate that. Any further comments on or questions on the summary of recommendations? Seeing none, I would be interested in a motion on the recommendations for the staff closes.
Thank you, Chair. I would move to approve the recommendations that the following budgets be closed as recommended by the governor and authorize for staff to make technical adjustments as necessary. Budgets number 1012601 Stewart Indian School Living Legacy, 1012600 Indian Commission, budget 1011350 Museums and History Lost City Museum, budget 1012870 Museums and History Nevada Historical Society, budget 1012940 Museums and History Nevada State Museum Carson City, budget 1012943 Museums and History Nevada State Museum Las Vegas, budget 1014216 Museums and History Nevada State Railroad Museums, budget 1012979 Nevada Arts Council. And I just would like to clarify with staff that I got all of the budgets in that. We're good?
Yes.
Okay, that's the motion.
Second.
I am now off mute. I have a motion from Assemblywoman Peters and a second from Senator Dennis. Do I have any discussions on that motion? I see none. So could we please take a roll call vote?
Assemblywoman Gorlow,
Yes.
Assemblyman Hafen,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Howdiggy,
Yes.
Assemblyman Levitt,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Miller,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Peters,
Yes.
Senator Dennis,
Yes.
Senator Goycochea,
Yes.
Chair Brooks.
Yes. And that motion passes, and that is the end of our budgets today. So that takes us to our last agenda item, which is public comment. Broadcast services, could you take a minute to see if there's anyone on the line for public comment, and and that might give them some time to get on the line if they aren't yet.
Thank you, Chair. If you are wanting to give public comment, please press *9 to put your place in the queue. Thank you, Chair. Right now, there is no one here ready for public comment.
Thank you. That will end our business for today in this joint subcommittee, and I will adjourn the meeting. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chair.